What about anything you'd change about your life?
I don't think there'd really be anything that I would change in my life. Sure, there's little bits and pieces, everybody's a Tuesday morning quarterback, but I think I've made steady progress. Seems like it's progress. And maybe, like I said, in North Dallas, Florida, things don't get any better and they don't get any worse, but they sure got different. And that's good enough for me.
What's up, everybody? As you can see behind me, the room's kind of, and you can hear it. Can you hear the echo in the room? That's what the room sounds like when you take out 2,000 records from it and some furniture as well. So yes, for those of you who don't know, I am in the process of moving to a new house, a home that me and my wife own. And so this is the last video I'm going to make in this particular office. The next time you see me, everything behind me is going to look a little bit different. So with all of this going on, I am taking the month of April off of doing old head related stuff. But I could not leave you guys hanging without doing the April edition of 40 Years Ago This Month. April 1985. And the big story that happened in April of 1985 is that it was announced officially that David Lee Roth would be leaving Van Halen. Now, it's interesting because at that time, I was very young. What was I, 7 years old or whatever? And I had only recently been introduced to Van Halen, and I was really into the album 1984. But that's really all I knew about them, and I knew that David Lee Roth had done a solo EP, which I also had and also very much enjoyed. But when they announced the split, I don't remember it having much of an effect on me because I was very young, but also I didn't understand the history and the influence and the impact of the David Lee Roth era of Van Halen. And funny enough, now, 40 years later, I look at it very differently because I am a Van Halen fan across the board. I'm pretty sure I equally enjoy David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar era Van Halen. And looking at it critically, when you look at what the band had done up until 1984, I really feel like the separation of David Lee Roth and Van Halen was for the best for everybody involved. I mean, I feel like David Lee Roth had a good run with his solo career in the late 80s, early 90s. And then, of course, same with Van Halen with Sammy Hagar. And we got all this great music out of it. But I really feel like that era of the band needed to end there. And I feel like Sammy stepped in and did an amazing job. And I don't know, it's hindsight at this point. I realize probably for many, many years, people were torn about, I guess people are still torn about it because people still ask questions like, who, David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar? And my answer is always both. Probably one of the few exceptions where I would say that there are two different vocalists in the band, and depending on what I want to listen to, only one of the two vocalists will do. Either way, that's an argument or a discussion that you could have with a million different people on a million different pages for a million years from now until a million years from now. But that happened in April of 1985. But the most popular music in April of 1985 was very much removed from the sound of Van Halen. The number one song in the country for the first week of April 1985 is a holdover from last month, my man Phil Collins' One More Night, or One More Week in the top spot. But then a fucking juggernaut happened, and I don't think anybody releasing anything could have competed with the song and the album that would end up being number one in the country and probably number one in other countries as well. That's right, for the rest of the month, the number one song in the country was We Are the World by USA for Africa. No, I'm not going to sing this time. I'm not going to sing. There comes a time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. Anyway, we're going to talk about this again in just a second. Moving on to the number one albums in the country for the first 3 weeks of April 1985, my man, Phil Collins, No Jacket Required. So he was able to maintain the top spot with that fucking album, which is well deserved in my opinion. But by the end of the month, the last week of April 1985, guess what? The album We Are the World by USA for Africa was number one. Now, I think that if you're above a certain age, and I think I was about that right age, 7 years old. If you're 5 to 7 years old in 1985 or older, you absolutely knew and remember We Are the World. It was fucking huge and everywhere. And of course, why wouldn't it be? Because it's got all kinds of fucking big name musicians and singers like all over the motherfucker. I do love that on the single for We Are the World, it lists all the people that are on it. And the first name it lists is Dan Aykroyd. I know they were probably going alphabetical, but that's an interesting selling point to be like, We Are the World, USA for Africa, featuring Dan Aykroyd. That's probably not the first name that you would think of. You're like, wow, that's Dan Aykroyd gets top billing over Michael Jackson when you do it alphabetically. But anyway, it was a big album and a big song for a very important cause. It was a good thing. And it, if you haven't watched, there's a documentary. Was it on Max or was it on Netflix? I don't remember. There's a documentary that came out, I think, last year about the making of We Are the World. And it is fascinating. If you love music documentaries, I highly recommend it. All right, moving on to the number one movies in the country. For the first 3 weeks, and it was also number one last month, I can't believe this movie was this successful. I do not remember this at all. But for the first 3 weeks, the number one movie in the country, Police Academy 2, their first assignment. We talked about it on the last episode. We don't need to talk about it anymore. But hey, I guess that makes sense because that's why they continued to make these sequels when, critically they were always panned, but I guess people were going to see them. I mean, I was one of them, but I always just assumed that I was weird, but I guess a lot of people were weird. And then the last week of April 1985, the number one movie in the country is a movie that I remember, but I don't think I've ever actually seen. I think I just know the poster for it, Stick, starring Burt Reynolds and apparently directed by Burt Reynolds. And it's based on a book by Elmore Leonard, whose shitloads of his books have been made into movies and TV shows. And I haven't seen it, but I have read up on it a little. Have I been looking over there the whole time? This is fucking weird. I haven't seen Stick, but I read up on it a little bit, and it seems to be one of those cases of a movie that the people that made it, one of them being Burt Reynolds, thought they had done an amazing movie, and then the studio came back and said, no, redo half of the movie, reshoot the movie and change these things. And then it ended up resulting in a movie that not only didn't do well, I mean, it did well in the box office. It was fucking number one. But critically, it didn't do well. And apparently, Elmore Leonard also was like, what the fuck is this movie? So I'd be interested. I think you can go and watch the director's cut of Stick. And I'd be interested to go back if I had that kind of time. I'm not a movie person. But if I was, I would go watch each version back to back just to get an idea of what the differences are. That's for another channel where people talk more about movies, not me. All right, now on to the album releases for April of 1985. Only two that really jumped out that I wanted to talk about, but both thrash metal classics. First up on April 5th, the debut album from Exodus, Bonded by Blood, the one Exodus album with Paul Bailoff on vocals. And it's an absolute fucking classic. A lot of people would call it the quintessential 80s thrash album. Considering I think it was finished in 1984 and then didn't get released until 1985. And there's all that talk about, would it have been a bigger deal if it had come out a little bit earlier? And that, obviously, that's assumptions and theories and whatnot, but it's possible. But at the end of the day, listening to this album alongside some of the other thrash metal albums that came out around the time, I don't think it would have been that huge because I don't think vocally Paul Bailoff would have been a lot of people's cup of tea. In fact, I even hear that today. Some people still don't like his vocals on this album. I do. I think they're great. Either way, very influential album, came out on the 5th of April, 1985. And then on the 8th of April, just a few days later in 1985, the second full-length album from Slayer, Hell Awaits, was released. And while I do really like Show No Mercy, the debut full-length from Slayer, I feel like Hell Awaits is where they became fully formed Slayer. Because if people are getting into Slayer for the first time, you probably wouldn't send them to Show No Mercy, but you could possibly send them to Hell Awaits, and it would send them right on their path. But yeah, great fucking album. Another thrash classic released April 1985. All right, so that's all I have to talk about for April of 1985. But now let's jump forward 10 years to April 1995. These 10-year jumps forward are always very interesting because the musical landscape, not just of popular music, but of just music that was coming out at the time, between 95 and 85 is very different. But I enjoy them both equally, which is probably why I do what I do. I can't just stick to talking about metal or music from a specific era, because while I did enjoy all the thrash metal and all the heavy metal and all that shit that was going on in 1995, I wasn't really listening to a lot of heavy metal. Some of it, but not a lot of it. I was listening to a lot of these albums that were coming out. 4 of them all came out on April 11th of 1995, starting with Pummel from All. I think this was like their 4th full-length album as All, and the first and only album on a major label. I believe it was on Interscope Records. And it's a fucking great album. And unfortunately, it's the last one where there was like a variety of songs and kind of them going off in interesting areas musically, because obviously after this, Descendants got back together, and then there were 2 more All albums, but they sounded very Descendants-y or something. But around this time, there were several All albums in a row where you didn't really know where the next song was going to go, and Pummel is really the last one that's like that, and to me, it's an absolute classic of the 90s. Also released on April 11th, 1995, the second full-length album from Hum, You'd Prefer an Astronaut. This is the album that introduced me to Hum. In fact, I clearly remember where I heard them. I was at my girlfriend's house at the time. We were sitting in whatever the TV room watching MTV, and the video for Stars came on, and I just remember being like, oh shit, I need to go get this album. And still, to me, it's one of the best songs of the 90s. And I fucking love Hum, and I love this album. If you don't really know much about Hum aside from the song Stars, or maybe you don't even know the song Stars, I don't know, go check them out. It's great. Also released on April 11th, 1995, the second album from the Muffs, Blonder and Blonder. At this point, I was a pretty big fan of the Muffs, and then ended up seeing the Muffs on tour for this album with Veruca Salt. I believe that show was in May, so you'll probably hear me talk about that next month. Rest in peace, Kim Shattuck, taken from us way too soon. Also released on April 11th, 1995, the final studio album from Tad, Infrared Riding Hood. And such a good fucking album. Tad is, God, I don't know. I have to do a whole other video, because like when you talk about the quote unquote grunge bands that came out of Seattle, obviously I'm a huge Nirvana fan, and that band's always going to be on top. But I really do think that Tad is the runner-up for my favorite band of that era from that region. And that says a lot, because you also got fucking Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. So, I don't know. Ask me again later. That's so much fucking great music from that one area, from that one time period. Jesus Christ. All right, moving on to April 18th, 1995, an album that I did not listen to at the time because I was not really into this group, but I really like it now. A Small Deadly Space from Fight, the second album and final album from the Rob Halford fronted, I guess it wasn't a side project, it was his band that he went to when he left Judas Priest. We recently did a slashed and mashed episode on the 2 Fight albums where we took the best of them and put them together. So go watch that if you don't know a lot about Fight, but they were a fucking great band and I was pretty dumb for not being into them at the time. But I'm okay. I'm okay with that. You know, I'm less dumb now. I still am dumb. That's why, like, I'm never going to say I don't like this and I'm never going to listen to this, because 10 years from now me will feel very different and be calling 47-year-old me dumb. So no more of that. No more of that, everybody. But finally, on April 21st, 1995, an album that I absolutely was into at the time, Born Annoying by Helmet. This is a compilation of like 7-inch singles, B-sides, whatnot, that were put out by Helmet from the beginning of their run in the late 80s all the way up to obviously 1995. And at this point, I'm pretty sure that I considered Helmet my favorite band in 1995. I really, if I remember right, they were the band that I was listening to the most. So when this came out, I'm like, oh shit, I got more Helmet. I was all over this fucking compilation. And there's 2 versions of the song Born Annoying, one that came out in 1989 and one that they recorded, I believe, in 94. And sometimes it's hard for me to decide which one I like better. They're both fucking great. It's that era of Helmet that's just chef's kiss. Did I do that right? I'm not a chef. Okay, well that is it for not only April 1985, but also April 1995. That's all I got. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of 40 years ago and 30 years ago this month. And the last old head video that you will see until May. Yeah, so I guess the next old head video you're probably going to see is 40 years ago this month, May 1985. So obviously, you know, I'm in the middle of moving. We still have a lot to do. So that's why I'm taking the month off. And like I said, the next time you see me, everything behind me will look very different. But I'm not going away, folks. Just a little break. I am not done making these videos that a lot of people ignore. But you guys don't, because you guys fucking rule, and I appreciate it. All right, well, everybody, have a great April. I'll see you in May. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you all again next month.